Bisedimet teknike në mes Kosovës dhe Serbisë me ndërmjetësimin e Bashkimit Evropian kanë filluar në vitin 2011. Ideja ka qenë që të diskutohen çështje teknike që do ta bënin më të lehtë jetën e përditshme për qytetarët e të dyja shteteve. Deri te fillimi i bisedimeve ka ardhur pasi që Asambleja e Përgjithshme e Kombeve të Bashkuara me 2010 miratoi rezolutën e sponsorizuar nga 27 vendet e atëhershme të Bashkimit Evropian dhe Serbia, e cila hapi rrugë për fillimin e dialogut Kosovë-Serbi, të lehtësuar nga BE-ja me qëllim të paqes, sigurisë dhe stabilitetit. Një gjë të tillë kontriboi mendimi i Gjykatës Ndërkombëtare e Drejtësisë me 2010, sipas të cilit shpallja e pavarësisë së Kosovës nuk paraqet shkelje të së drejtës ndërkombëtare. Sidoqoftë, edhe pse në fillim u paralajmërua që Kosova do të bisedojë me Serbinë vetëm për çështje teknike, të cilat janë udhëhequr nga ekipet teknike të të dyja shteteve, në fund të vitit 2012, krahas bisedimeve teknike filluar dhe bisedimet në nivelin politik për normalizimin e marrëdhënieve mes Kosovës dhe Serbisë. Çfarë u arrit në bisedimet teknike? Dialogun teknik në vitin 2011 e ka udhëhequr Qeveria e Kosovës dhe në krye të ekipit negociator të Kosovës ishte Edita Tahiri. Serbinë ka përfaqësuar Borko Stefanović, ndërkaq ndërmjetësuesi i BE-s ishte Robert Cooper. Në vitin 2014, kryenegociatori i Serbisë u bë Marko Đurić, drejtor i zyrës për Kosovën në qeverinë serbe. Deri më tani janë arritur mbi 23 marrëveshje në dialogun në nivelin teknik dhe politik. Marrëveshja e parë arritur me 2011 ishte për regjistrat civil, pastaj marrëveshja për lirinë e lëvizjes, vulat doganore, pranimin e diplomave, për menaxhimin e integruar të kufirit, për përfaqësimin dhe bashkëpunimin rajonal, për telekomin dhe për vizitat zyrtare. Në vitin 2015 është arritur marrëveshja për shpërbërjen dhe integrimin e të ashtu quajturës mbrojtja civile në veri të Kosovës. Marrëveshja përnjojnë reciproke të policave të automjeteve për energji, si dhe marrëveshja për certifikatat ADR. Ndërkaq në janar të vitit 2017, Kosova dhe Serbia arritën marrëveshjen për integrimin e gjyqësorit në veri të vendit. Por jo të gjitha marrëveshjet e arritura janë zbatuar. Sipas një raporti të Institutit Demokratik të Kosovës lidhur me dialogun Kosovë-Serbi, zbatimi i tyre i marrëveshjeve nuk ka qenë i kënaqshëm, duke u nisur edhe nga vetë natyra e marrëveshjeve, si dhe mosgadishmëria e palëve, e veçanërisht e Serbisë për të respektuar marrëveshjet e arritura. Sipas këtij raporti, dy kuptimësia konstruktive ose ambiguiteti konstruktiv është elementi që ka karakterizuar këto marrëveshje. Metodë kjo për t'u përshtatur qëndrimit të palëve rreth statusit të Kosovës. Sipas raportit të KDI-s, i cili është hartuar bazuar në raportet zyrtare të qeverisë së Kosovës, marrëveshjet e zbatuara plotësisht janë ato për vulat doganore, marrëveshja për mbledhjen e të hyrave doganore dhe për njohjen reciproke të ADR certifikatave. Pjesërisht të zbatuara janë marrëveshjet mbi kadastrën, për regjistrin civil, për lirinë e lëvizjes, për përfaqësim dhe bashkëpunim rajonal dhe për shpërbërjen e mbrojtjes civile. Në proces të zbatimit janë marrëveshjet për menaxhimin e integruar të kufirit, për telekomin, për certifikatat e produkteve farmaceutike, kurse të pazbatuara janë marrëveshjet për pranimin e diplomave universitare dhe për njohjen e policave të automjeteve. Ndryshe në tetor të vitit 2012, procesi dialogut teknik kaloi në nivel politik. Negociatat atë botë u zhvilluan ndërmjet Prishtinës dhe Beogradit nga kryeministrat e atëhershëm, Hashim Thaçi dhe Ivica Dačić. Marrëveshja e parë në kuadër të këtij procesi u arrit ndërmjet dy kryeministrave në prill të vitit 2013. Më vonë, procesi u ngrit në negociata në nivel të presidentëve. Kosovën e përfaqësonte presidenti Hashim Thaçi, ndërsa Serbinë presidenti Aleksandar Vučić. Derisa dialogu i Brukselit po zhvillohej, Serbia vazhdoi të udhëheqë një fushat për tërheqjen e njohjeve të Kosovës dhe parandalimin e anëtarësimit të vendit në organizata të ndryshme ndërkombëtare. Për shkak të mospranimit të Kosovës në Interpol në nëntor të vitit 2018, qeveria e atëhershme e Kosovës, e udhëhequr nga Ramush Haradinaj, vendosin një taks 100% ndaj mallrave të importuara nga Serbia dhe Bosnia e Hercegovina, duke kurzuar tërheqjen e këtij vendimi me njohjen e pavarësisë së Kosovës nga ana e shtetit serb. Ky vendim shkaktoi një ngërç në procesin e negociatave, sepse Beogradi zyrtar nuk pranoi të kthehej në Bruksel derisa të shfuqizohet vendimi për tarifat. Pasardhësi i Haradinajt, Albin Kurti, i cili drejtoi qeverinë e Kosovës për rreth një muaj e gjysmë, e shfuqizoi vendimin për taksat dhe e zëvendësoi atë me masa të reciprocitetit. Ky vendim nuk gjeti mbështetjen e Bashkisë Ndërkombëtare, e cila u kërkoi palëve të angazhohen për të krijuar një klimë pozitive për rifillimin e dialogut. Qeveria e Kosovës, e formuar në qershor të vitit 2020 dhe udhëhequr nga Abdullah Hoti, e shfuqizoi vendimin për reciprocitetin në ditët e para të punës së saj, duke deklaruar se kështu u larguan pengesat në procesin e dialogut për normalizimin e marrëdhënieve mes Kosovës dhe Serbisë. Krahas procesit në Bruksel, gjatë administratës së presidentit amerikan Trump, u zhvilluan bisedimet e liderëve serb dhe kosovar në shtëpinë e bardhë, që rezultoi me atë që quhet Marrëveshja e Washingtonit, e cila përmbante disa pika prej të cilave më të rëndësishmet konsiderohen pranimi i Kosovës nga Izraeli, si dhe ndalja e fushatës së Serbisë kundër njohjeve të pavarësisë së Kosovës dhe inkuadrimi i Kosovës në zonën mini Schengen. Për shkak të situatës politike në Kosovë, qeverisë jo stabile dhe zhvillimit të zgjedhjeve parlamentare të jashtëzakonshme, që rezultuan me ardhjen në pushtet të lëvizjes vetëvendosje, takimi i radhës në Bruksel është mbajtur pas gati një periudhe 10 mujore. Kur në fillim të qershorit 2021, në Bruksel për herë të parë u takuan kryeministri kosovar Albin Kurti dhe presidenti serb Aleksandar Vučić. Ky takim u parapri nga një sër takime e vizita përgatitore nga akterët kryesor ndërkombëtar. Përfaqësuesi i Bashkimit Evropian për dialogun Miroslav Lajçak dhe përfaqësuesi special për Ballkanin Perëndimor i Departamentit të Shtetit Amerikan Matthew Palmer. Të dytë qëndruan për disa ditë në rajon, me rast vizituan të dyja kryeqytetet, Prishtinën dhe Beogradin. Takimi i parë ndërmjet dy liderëve, Kurti, Vučić, kaloi me tensione dhe deklarata të forta nga të dyja palët. Përplasja kryesore ndodhi për shkak të agjendave kundërshtuese të dyja palëve. Përderisa pala serbe në krye me presidentin Vučić, ashtu siç janë shprehur edhe më parë, kanë kërkuar që të formohet Asociacioni i Komunave me Shumicë Serbe e ashtu quajtura Zajednicë. Pala kosovare, në krye me kryeministrin Albin Kurti, është e fokusuar në zbulimin e varezave të mbetura masive në Serbi, me qytetarët shqiptar të Kosovës të vrarë gjatë luftës së fundit. Për më shumë, Kurti ka kërkuar shkarkimin e kryetarit të Asociacionit Serb të pagjeturve, ish politikanin e partisë së Miloševićit gjatë 90-tave në Kosovë, Veljko Odalović. Natyrisht që këto kërkesa nuk u pranuan as nga njëra e as nga pala tjetër dhe u përdorën si arsye për deklarata të forta për media që të dy liderët ndaras i bën pas takimit. Është akorduar një tjetër takim që pritet të mbahet gjatë kësaj vere. Vëret një përkushtim më i madh i Brukselit që të mban leadershipin në këtë proces, pasi që tashmë me ndryshimin e administratës në Washington kemi një rikthim të diplomacisë amerikane në Ballkanin Perëndimor.
It depends on who you talk about, who is expecting what. I think, we're going to say what I like, speaking perhaps from the point of view of international actors. The expectation is the relationship between the two countries will normalize. I mean, this is a fair expectation that after so many years, the two countries should get to some agreements that make life the people who live in each country easier and better. I don't know what the expectation of Vučić are. Maybe to create, seems from what he says, to create an association of municipalities with a Serb majority that will constitute like a kind of an area in which Serbs exercise executive power. The expectation on the Kosovo side and the government of Albin Kurti, I'm not quite sure what the expectation is. So they haven't quite said it. I think there is a lot of skepticism, and they're right on being skeptic, because this dialogue has been going on for quite a while, like for almost 10 years, right? And agreements were made and were not kept. And the relationship between the two countries have not improved. So all in all, all over this belt, I think there is quite some skepticism.
Any dialogue or any discussion in this particular case that is between Kosovo and Serbia is good in and of itself. That is, having a dialogue, as a rule, can advance the causes that either or both people are seeking. But from this particular dialogue at this juncture, I really don't expect much because of the profound differences between the two countries. Kosovo is asking for recognition, obviously Serbia refusing to do so. Serbia would like to have a municipality association with executive power, which Kurti and Kosovo refused to do so. So these are significant issues between the two sides. But having a dialogue, as I said earlier, could begin a process. And we need to have some kind of process in order to further advance the relationship between the two sides.
So I can imagine that what will be discussed is the continuation of the process. If you want to reach the last step of negotiations, then you need to have recognition processes between Serbia and Kosovo, and we are not there.
In order for the dialogue to be successful, there needs to be agreement at the beginning that the end result of the dialogue is going to be mutual recognition based on Kosovo's independence and sovereignty. Marty Adasari told me before he entered into his mediation process that he knew exactly where it would end up. The same case here. In order to succeed, the US has to be more thoroughly involved. We've been doing this now for so many years. It's time to finish and move on.
Yeah, well, that would be nice if the dialogue would reach a decision or recognition. I don't think it will happen. I don't think that Serbia will recognize Kosovo, not in the near future, not with this leadership that is the same that was there before the war and during the war. So I'm also pessimistic on this. The alternative, I don't think you can move Serbia on this, but I think that the EU should really make an effort on treating Serbia the way it treats all the other countries in the Western Balkans, and not let Serbia get away with not respecting standards on human rights and democratic freedoms and liberties, on not recognizing agreements and so on.
There are no other options. Either Serbia recognizes Kosovo, or in accordance with Chapter 35, it's going to be locked out of any integration into Euro-Atlantic institutions. Now, this discussion has been going on for a long time without result. Serbia needs to understand there are rules to the discussion. Either it's going to abide by those rules, or it's going to become a pariah state. And the Serbian people are going to be excluded from Europe. They should be punished if this doesn't move forward, with their visa liberalization revoked and other rewards suspended. It's time for Serbia to be sincere and to allow the dialogue to succeed. That's going to require a new approach.
Well, I think, as a matter of fact, any kind of discussion, any kind of dialogue between the two sides has to be based on the premise that at the end of the negotiating process, Serbia recognized Kosovo as an independent state. But that is not on the table at this particular juncture. My feeling is that any discussion between the two sides has to establish that premise from the very beginning. That is, you cannot discuss anything in vacuum. Belgrade recognized this at this juncture or not. The dialogue can proceed, but the assumption, the underlying assumption has to be that at the end of this dialogue, a recognition of Kosovo as an independent state is a must. That is going to be a long, painful process. But if the dialogue continues on that basis, then there is a prospect, maybe for a few years down the line, that there will be mutual recognition between the two sides.
I'm not sure Serbia is going to recognize Kosovo, because you know that this issue is a very sensitive issue, and the current president, Mr. Vučić, is not going to take probably a lot of risk vis-a-vis his electorate. So the level of nationalism is such in Serbia that I have some doubt that they will recognize Kosovo in the short term. But they also know that they will not enter themselves the EU, because they are negotiating if they don't make steps in this domain.
Maybe the documents can be taken seriously, but their content shouldn't be. That would be the realization of the Milosevic project, through ethnic cleansing and on the battlefield. Vučić shouldn't be able to accomplish at the negotiating table. Ethnic partition was a bad idea when it was first floated. The sponsors of that idea should be reprimanded. The only way that this problem is going to be solved is through Serbia's recognition of Kosovo within its current frontiers. Anything short of that is a formula for increased tensions and ultimately violent conflict.
I think there are two things here. First of all, both Paris and Berlin denied they have supported such a document. So I don't think it's necessary to discuss something that the countries that presumably that compose it do not deny it altogether. The other thing is territorial exchange. I personally do not support that. That is, the Kosovo and Serbia have been together under Yugoslavia. They know each other perfectly well. They've been there. They have had regular, normal relationship with one another. That is, if there's going to be any solution, practical one, because if you start that, where do you stop? That is, the European itself, that is the desire of both countries to be joined the EU, should not be ethnic lines being drawn within the countries. That is, the whole EU premise is that there is a collective relationship between all various ethnic groups to create that, to establish, to change borders will be in fact contrary to the EU Charter, to the EU and the Kosovo's and Serbia prospect of becoming an EU member states.
Those, just the idea of non-papers, these are what we call like trial balloons. So these are papers that are floating around to see how much people can make, how many concessions or how far the two sides can go on changing borders, swapping territories. It's an old idea. It's been going on for a while. I mean, this is the idea of Serb nationalists. Dobrica Ćosić talked about this in 1990, so it's not new. It's very destabilizing for the Balkans. it shouldn't happen. So I think whatever proposal is floating around shouldn't be taken seriously by anyone, not the two parties, Serbia, Kosovo, not international actors. Maybe some border changes can happen in the future with the two countries that recognize each other and they can easily decide on their own what they want to do, but not as now as an alternative to achieve a durable peace and a recognition between these two countries. It's not a good idea to have mono-ethnic territories.
Well, I think that the Serbian component in terms of population is part of Kosovo. It's a legacy of history, and again, we're not going to reorganize any state, including Kosovo, just around the ethnic criteria. So if we want to have, a modern Kosovo in the future, we have to accommodate the two communities, which means the Albanian communities and the Serbian communities. So I think the position coming from Pristina, which says that it's going against the statehood, etc., is a bit old-fashioned. Pristina has to, introduce also some flexibility and recognize that some Serbian population is living in Kosovo, and that the peace in the future can only be realized, or also the integration in the EU, if both communities could find their place in the Kosovo statehood, right? So we still have a bit of work to do to go beyond nationalism and consider that diversity, plurality is the only way to recreate efficient state in the future.
I think any association can be helpful, but with executive power, that means a de facto cessation. That is, if Belgrade decide anything it wants to do with these areas, which is under Kosovo's sovereignty, then that basically suggests as if these municipalities are no longer a part and parcel of Kosovo. And I don't think the Pristina should accept that. Whereas association without executive power, that may well be acceptable because that these municipalities remain under Kosovo's sovereignty, and but nevertheless can still promote the relationship between the two sides.
We talk a lot about the rule of law, right? So an assembly of Serb majority municipalities that has executive power is not constitutional in Kosovo. The Constitutional Court has already said that. So it's against the laws of Kosovo, it's against the Constitution of Kosovo. I tend to agree with the position of the government that is also not something that encourages the functionality of the country. On the contrary, it will be dysfunctional. It will separate even more the Serb minority, non-majority community, as we say, from the majority of Kosovo. It will tend to ghettoize the minority, and will start to promote these ethnic political leaders who actually act much more on their own interests and the interests of nationalist circles in Belgrade than the interests of the people who live in Kosovo. So illegal, non-constitutional, dysfunctional, and bad for the people who live in these municipalities. By the way, it's also against the laws of European laws. So the Charter of Local Self-Government, the European Charter of Local Self-Government precisely prohibits the creation of entities that have executive power, or they arrogate powers belong only to the municipality. So all in all, it's not a proposal that can be really go anywhere.
There's nothing wrong with ASM or decentralization. In fact, it's called for in Kosovo's constitution. The Ahtisaari Principles made it clear that he supported the devolution of power. But ASM with executive power is, in fact, a formula for conflict and failure. It's not going to work. It's a bad idea. Anyone who supports it supports the breakup of Kosovo, and that will lead to violent disruption, and it will undermine diplomatic efforts over a long period of time. Of course it can. It can make it clear what these agreements say, how they'll be implemented, that the US and the EU are unified in their approach. Only through transatlantic cooperation that supports Kosovo's sovereignty and independence are we going to get to a deal that's meaningful. Anything short of that won't work, and it's just a waste of time. If the international community wants to see an agreement, it needs to make it clear to the parties before they even start another round of discussions how it's going to go.
Oh, well, yes, definitely. Well, the EU can play a much more productive role that it has so far. One of the things that the EU could do could actually encourage the 5 non-recognizing countries, encourage them to recognize Kosovo, or at least not block Kosovo membership in international organizations that are like the good organization where Kosovo could play a role, like the UNESCO, the Council of Europe, WHO, or the Interpol. If you care about fighting organized crime and corruption, Kosovo should be a member of the Interpol, to give you an example. In time of a pandemic, Kosovo should be a member of WHO, the agency that deals with public health in the world. So the EU can really play an important role in facilitating the consolidation of Kosovo sovereignty and encouraging those who haven't recognized Kosovo to recognize it, and clarify the terms of any dialogue that goes on between Serbia and Kosovo by holding Serbia responsible for following the standards that they ask from any other country. Because Serbia cannot have a privileged position in this dialogue.
Yes, of course, and well, there are different statements because there are different opinions, right? So the power of the EU is to be able to create a form of compromise and a form of mediation between the two positions, right? It was possible some years ago with the normalization agreement. You remember when Mrs. Ashton decided, well, to play a leadership to make sure that this normalization agreement happened. Well, something like this has to be provided again by the EU, except that there is one limit. It works if the parts, at stake, which means Kosovo on one side, Serbia on the other side, know that there could be a final outcome, a carrot to a certain extent, which is called enlargement. And if this is not clear from the EU side, in this case, I suspect that it would be difficult for the EU to play this role of mediator between the two sides. To accept compromise, you need also to be sure about your objective, to be sure about the outcome you could get if you accept this compromise.
There cannot be. It's an easy question. There cannot be reconciliation, which normalization is one thing. Two countries decide what to do on certain issues. Reconciliation is a much deeper process, and that cannot happen if crimes are not recognized. I'm not surprised that we don't know where the mass graves are, because they were created to hide evidence of crimes. So you don't transport bodies, like hundreds of bodies of Albanians, to Serbia on trucks or whatever, and bury them in some secret location for nothing. I mean, that was times. So I'm not surprised that we know, where these bodies are, that it's easy to find them, but pressure should be applied on Serbia to find those missing, and on Kosovo, because there are Serb Roma missing. And so the same thing should be done on those who know in Kosovo, where mass graves of Serbian civilians are. That doesn't seem to happen, and it should be really a core issue of the dialogue, together with justice for sexual violence survivors, because we always forget them. But there are thousands of survivors of sexual violence, and they need justice, and that should be part of the dialogue as well.
There can only be reconciliation through transparency and truth. What we've seen in The Hague, the conviction of Ratko Mladic, reconfirmed, should also bear the same principle in mind with Kosovo. Mass graves need to be identified, bodies need to be exhumed and buried properly. There should be compensation on both sides if crimes were committed. But we know that the mass majority of crimes were committed by ethnic Albanians. It's time to stop messing around. I'm frankly tired of this conversation. It's the same discussion. These are the same questions I've heard over the past years. Either the US and the EU make crystal clear what's going to happen, and they tell Belgrade and Pristina at the outset what to expect, or let's just abandon this process. Let's put Serbia in the penalty box, and let's keep it there until it becomes a normal society led by political leaders who have credibility.
It's very difficult, and I fully agree. Reconciliation requires revisiting the historical perspective. And that is, I'll give you the perfect example. Germany today is the leading state within the EU. What the Germany have taken the proper step by recognizing the atrocities that the country has committed during World War II. By admitting so, then they paved the way for proper back integration and becoming not just a part of the EU, but a leading state within the EU. So it was extremely necessary to admit past atrocities that the Germany then committed during the Nazi era. I think Serbia needs to also understand it is not just recognizing in order to reconcile relationship between Serbia and Kosovo, but it is also reconciliation in terms of the atrocities committed during the war against the Kosovars, in terms of Serbia's own relationship with the international community, with the European Union as well. And I think this would be good for Serbia to do so. And I think the EU ought to have this kind of discussion with Serbia and explain to them that in the final analysis, historic record is there. But if they want to come clean and become an integral part and a constructive partner in the Union, they ought to have a clear record, and admitting to past war crimes would be a necessary step to be taken in that direction.
I think it's difficult to reconcile if you do not speak about the crime. But in this case, everybody has to speak about its own crimes, right? You know what I mean? Of course, we know the historical responsibility of Serbia in what happened in Yugoslavia. I don't like the idea that you just put the things under the carpet, because if you put the things under the carpet, saying, well, we don't speak about that, it will immediately come back afterwards. And it's probably better to solve these issues before membership of the European Union than after. You know what I mean? I think those things have to be put on the agenda. We had international justice. We saw recently that the criminal court in The Hague made a statement concerning Mr. Mladic. We can continue this process because this is the only process. You cannot have lost part of your family or just have no news about what members of the family experience where they are dead, where they are. You cannot just have a normal democratic life if you don't solve these problems in advance. So I am in favor of speaking about these difficult or sort of things, if possible now.
Kosovo Albanians, about Albanian Americans. That remember the three Vitici brothers. There is a trial that goes on and on and never comes to a solution in Serbia. We know who the perpetrators are because they were in jail. So and they were killed after they were released. So yes, I mean the special court is going to do its course. Is taking its course. There are people that have been indicted. They are in jail. They're waiting trial. They are in trial. I mean, the same as I said before, we should ask from Serbia, we should hold Serbia responsible for following standards of justice, international and domestic, that is not following. There are trials on the Chusk massacre. Chusk massacre in 1999, May 1999, is going on for a long time. Justice delayed is justice denied, and Serbia is not coming. It's not very forthcoming on war crimes.
It should condemn the crimes. It should hold those accountable. And in order for the EU to have credibility, the 5 non-recognizing states need to change their position. Visa liberalization for Kosovo passport holders needs to proceed. This conversation is going around and around. It should either move forward or it should stop. Enough games.
See, I think going to the court at this point, it defies the spirit of the dialogue between the two sides. That is, if you're going to the court, you are basically now charging one country against with the war crimes. And that is going to be inconsistent with the spirit of the dialogue that ought to be taking place. To go to the international court at this juncture, at this point, would be counterproductive in every which way. That is, it is inconsistent with having, on the one hand, a dialogue between the two countries, and on the other hand, going to the international court to seek justice. I would not do so at this juncture. We'll have to see how the process, how the negotiations are proceeding and how successful they will be. And we'll also see whether Serbia itself come to the conclusion that by admitting war crimes, it will then relieve itself, will eventually clear the record, because the historic record is as such, it is a dark cloud basically on Serbia today. And I think rather than go to an international court, we have to focus on the process of the negotiation. And at one point, the EU ought to be talking with Serbia behind, privately, that it's time has come for them to recognize war crimes in order to clear the historic record. Just like Germany has done, and Germany today is the leading country within the EU, but it has done, the wise thing to do was to admit to these war crimes and clear the record. And today, Germany is no longer being seen as the country that has committed these atrocities, because it has come now with a clear record.
I would say yes, but this is my personal opinion. Let's wait and see what happened in reality. But for the reasons I explained before, I think this should be put on the table. Yes, definitely.
I don't know. This is such a long process. It's only 20 years, and the conflict is not resolved yet. So I don't think you can have reconciliation if you don't solve the conflict. Serbia doesn't recognize Kosovo. Serbia doesn't recognize the crimes they committed in Kosovo. On what basis should reconciliation happen if there is no recognition of what has been done? You know, I think, you know, anyone can forgive anyone else, you know, if they ask for an apology, if they apologize, but this is not happening. I think it's a very long process, and it needs to be done. The process needs to be conducted at the different levels. There is a high level, the states, a middle level, civil society, a very local level, small communities. It's a long process and involves everyone. I can't see it happening.
First of all, well, being convinced among the societies that nationalism goes nowhere. And I know it's difficult, especially when you just have the feeling of regaining your identity, right? If you take the history, it's not very far. The regaining of identity, it's 35 years. But at a certain stage, you have to think that there is a difference between nationalism and being a nation, right? So you could be a nation without having nationalism. Nationalism means that you have a feeling of revenge all the time. And this has to be, eliminated. How to do that? Well, education is very important, discussion, controversy, because controversy is democracy, right? So we have to speak about that. We have to organize, debate with people from both sides. All what is done by NGOs, by TV like yours for reconciliation goes in the good direction, but no other way. If you take the Franco-German reconciliation, right, in 1950s, so 5 years after the end of the war, the level of anti-Germanism in France was very, very high. And we discovered 15 years afterwards that it has, progressively disappeared. Why? It's because we organized exchanges. We decided to have debates between young people from both sides, between intellectuals, between media representatives, etc. This is how to deal with this problem. Reconciliation can only happen if there is a process at the level of the civil society. It's not just the state and the politicians who said, well, guys, tomorrow it's reconciliation. No. Of course it helps, but it has to be accompanied by a dialogue between the civil societies. So try to make sure that the other is not the enemy, right? This is the way to reconcile.
There needs to be contact communication and cooperation between civil society. They need to identify their shared interests, their common values, and ways of working together. The government in Belgrade has demonized Kosovo Albanians and made this much harder than it should be. Through people-to-people interaction and mutual benefit, we can move forward from the current impasse, and Albanians and Serbs can start to cooperate and to derive mutual benefit. Anything short of practical benefits is a charade, and we shouldn't even consider it.
Look, the normalization process should include all kinds of trade, economic development, free movement of people and goods between the two sides. This is a necessary first step. But as I said earlier, that Serbia ought to understand Kosovo's independence is not negotiable. Over 100 countries have recognized Kosovo, and that is not going to be reversed, not now, not ever. The Serbian government need to understand that. The EU, the United States ought to hammer this issue time and again to Serbia. This has to be the end of the road, is a mutual recognition. The process of normalization is a vehicle, is a means by which to get to that point. But it cannot just be on and of itself. But in the end, mutual recognition is central to between the two countries in order, because of us. Independence, as I said, is not something having suffered the way I have suffered during the war. And moreover, mind you, Kosovo was an independent province when under Yugoslav government. And it is the right of the Kosovo people to maintain their independence.